work to center the people who were the most harmed by the drug war. People who've been incarcerated, lost families to incarceration, people who buried their children to needless overdose. And today we want to have a conversation stemming from much of what Michelle talked about around criminalization. I can remember being a young organizer in 1991 when I was 5. And that's a little rude. That's a little rude. Okay? My oldest friend over here laughing the loudest. Robin Templeton. You know, when we were organizing and taking over streets in New York City because they were raising tuition at the City University of New York, which would have meant thousands of kids couldn't go to school anymore, but there were jail cells being built for those same communities. We had to be aware that when we went in the street that some of our peers were here on student visas, some were doing the work with a conviction on them, and we had to do immeasurable levels of security. I know it's hard to believe, I'm actually highly security trained. Did y'all see that? You didn't see that coming. You didn't see that, you don't know what I know. All of this little cute pull-on package. But we very seriously had to do, extraordinary amounts of security because there were so many restrictions that were placed on people who had a criminal record. Not the least of which was that they could not associate with anyone else who had a criminal record, which meant there was a time that Dorsey and Kenny could not sit in the same room.
That's right.
There was a time that Pete White couldn't sit in this room. Sandra couldn't sit in this room. It was cause for rearrest, reincarceration. But the fight and the pushback that you have done meant that not only do you sit in a room, but you run a movement. And that did not happen without deliberate care. I also want to recognize Gwendolyn Black, who's in this room, from Oklahoma. We're the single largest incarcerator of women on the planet. And she has never stopped fighting, never stopped pushing. So just recognize Gwendolyn Black. Please. So let me just say a little bit about how we do these things. These aren't like, sort of the formal, I don't know why there's a screen, there won't be a PowerPoint. It's just decoration. Maybe we can get Kenny's face up there. Yeah? But we wanted to have this conversation about what we need to do as organizers and as organizations to ensure that people who have been targeted by mass incarceration and the drug war are safe, are valued, are trained. A lot of times we sort of do a nod to diversity without putting in place the full scale of cultural competency to ensure that people can be in leadership, not just tokenized in our movement. So that's the conversation we're going to have today. I'm going to talk with my friends over here for about, I wish it wasn't so far away. Yes, so let me take a seat at the table. We're going to do this kitchen table style. Let me come over here. Is that okay? Is that okay? We can see? Yeah, so anybody see Susan? So what we're going to do is this on? I'm loud, right?
No.
Is this on? Okay. Kenny liked me louder. We're going to talk for about 40, 45 minutes or so, and then we want to engage you in conversation. It's only us working together that we're going to come up with some of the best ideas. And there's a couple of seats up front. I'm sorry that this room is not big enough for all of us, but we're going to make it work. We're going to act like we love each other. Get in a little close, a little tight.
And some sitting space right down here.
And let me just begin by actually introducing to you who we have. So So all the way, is this my left? Is it on the far left? Let me introduce to you a new friend, a woman who I met at the formerly incarcerated and convicted peoples and family movements, Cop said that 3 times. Formerly incarcerated and convicted people and families movement last September in Oakland, California, where how many of us got together, Dorsey?
About 600-700.
600-700 of us came together to talk about what it meant to be in this movement after having been criminalized. I met Michelle Crentsil there. She was a new program officer with Open Philanthropy, which is doing so much to seed a movement so that people can do criminal justice reform as they define it. Not as it's defined up here, but as it's defined by the people who actually live the real world consequences of criminal justice reform. Michelle comes out of a long history of union organizing and a real world life story of her own family living with incarceration. We're not going to have any shame in this room. And you know what, let me just do a level. How many people in this room have had a family member or loved one in prison? Just by show of hands. No shame in this room. Because when you have 2.2 million people go missing on our watch and in our lifetime, that is not an act of personal failure, that is a policy decision.
Yes.
And I want us to be crystal clear about that. Michelle comes to us from that lived reality and from a very deep commitment to undo and untangle this mess. Welcome, Michelle Crentsil. Sitting next to Michelle Crentsil is a woman who probably walked me into this movement almost more than anyone else when I first started in DPA in 2005. Already she was seasoned, had been one of the leads on ensuring that Proposition 36, which then was the single largest criminal justice reform that the United States had ever seen. Talked to me about what it meant to be here, talked to me about what it meant to come from an upper class environment and a white environment and to have 2 of her sons cycle through a system, and all of the impacts that brought by people who thought that would never touch us, and how people reacted to her. She then went on to not only build her organization a new path, but then started organizing mothers throughout the entire United States, Moms United Against the Drug War. Join me in welcoming my friend Gretchen Burton. Go back a long way. I'm not going to tell you when I first met Dorsey Nunn. I was 7. He was 68. But you know, I finally got him to listen to me. He said, "The child shall lead." But in the late 1990s, working together with Angela Davis and Robin Templeton, Robin, raise your hand. Some of us came together and decided that the situation was dire. Angela used to say quite often that if in 1970, somebody had said to her that we would have 2 million people in prison and 7.7 million people under the control of the criminal justice system, she would have thought it was a sick joke. In that period, she was also asking and centering the drug war as a main driver the question, are prisons obsolete? She put forward the idea that prisons should be abolished. She asked us to imagine a world without prisons because those countries actually do exist. And she called us together and she called it critical resistance, and we gathered in Berkeley in 1998. That's where I met this man who had already been working and building, going into the prisons and pulling those young people out and saying, this is how you're going to stay out. You're going to organize. You're going to free your people. It was a promise that he made to the men that he was locked up with. He has never taken one step back from that promise. And one thing with Dorsey, I think that moves me so much about gatherings like this and why DPA is so committed to its partnership program was that we were again in Berkeley, California in 2006, just a few of us. And at that time, there were 3 municipalities that had banned the box. 3. And Dorsey said then, had he known that that box had been banned in Boston with our brother Kazi, had he known what had happened in Chicago, he wouldn't have had to reinvent the wheel in San Francisco, where he would go on to ban the box. And he committed himself to ensuring that everybody would have access to the information so it could sweep the world, and sweep it he did, because he took it all the way to the White House until there was a federal ban on the box. This is Dorsey, Nunn. Oh, I ain't too embarrassing. I got Kenny Glasgow up here next. There's probably no one I enjoy picking on more than Pastor Kenny Glasgow. Well, when somebody want to call up your phone at 6 in the morning to register for something that you told them to register to, come on, you know, tell the truth, shake the devil up. You know what it is on the truth. Right? And you said, like Kenny, I sent you that email 4 times 6 weeks ago. You know what he said to me? I said, but you the mama bear, Asha. I'm like, man, you older than me. The doctor didn't pull, I didn't push. What are you talking about? Amen. And yeah, I answer that phone every single time. Because there is one state in these United States where even if you are in prison, you can cast a vote. That state is Alabama. Let's dig into it a little bit. So I want to begin by probably asking all of you about how the laws governing people who've been incarcerated or convicted of crime impacts your ability to organize. And so this is especially important for those of us who have never served time. How do those laws impact your ability to do your work? Let me start with you, Kenny.
You would start with me.
Yes, I would.
So,
Payback.
Being incarcerated,
Can you stand up, Kenny?
one of the things that I want everybody to understand is, let me take you inside incarceration first. I think I need to just bring you inside and get you there. So you in prison, you no longer belong to you. You no longer Kenny Glasgow, whatever your name is. You're now a number, 849481. And within that number contains not only who you are, what your record is, but how many other people have existed in there before you. So if I'm 849481, then that means 849487 all the way back to 1 existed in the same prison before me. And because of that, in this prison system, I have to recreate a world, Tina Reynolds, that is outside from the world that all of you live in. But yet inside this penalization, I have to learn to coexist with other people who are in there that's trying to figure out how do we recreate what we're supposed to be creating in our creation. Anybody understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And we start to learn to adapt to each other in a different atmosphere, and being locked up, yet we're controlled. We're lined up like cows when we go eat. We're lined up whenever we go to the library or anything else. We don't use the bathroom by ourselves anymore. Because not only are the inmates that's locked up with you sitting there watching you in open bays, there's no separation or nothing like that. Not only that, but the guards are always in the glass. They looking at you too. Don't matter whether they win men or women. And for those of you that are men in here, you know, hold on for a minute, because I'm really taking them somewhere. Because when you're a man, and the first thing you do when you get there is they strip you butt naked, spray you down, stick their finger up your behind and violate you, and let you know you don't belong to you. How does that impact everything we do in organizing? We learn then the inhumanity of humanity. And in learning that, we become that number, and we learn everything that that number means. And then everything that that number means now is my life. So our whole existence, and I'm quite sure Dorsey's going to add to it. I'm going to leave you some, Dorsey. And our whole existence, now that I've been violated, that has never happened to me before because I didn't choose that kind of life, but now you choose it for me. You tell me when I eat, you tell me when I sleep. I have to hold up, I can't even use the bathroom. God forbid I'm in line to go somewhere and I got to use the bathroom. You're going to beat me? And so now I learn every law, every policy, and every ordinance because I got to be so meticulous about following your rules and regulations that they become me. So I don't allow you to violate me anymore. And you ask how what we go through impact our work on changing these laws. We have to learn to become these laws.
All right.
We are now these laws.
All right.
We are the epitome and the inhumanity and the despicableness of these laws, according to what society has claimed us to be. So now these laws become me, and I become these laws, and then I cannot do anything else but seek to change them.
Thank you. Dorsey, take us outside of the prison. So the first day you came home and everything that you've been home now 31 years, right? So just going back to, right? Love her. And just what that was like, and you know, and I want to think about it in terms of, you know, another thing about Dorsey Nunn is Dorsey started an organization, not just all of us or also legal services for prisoners with children, but also Free at Last, which was a recovery center, a live-in recovery center, which some of us in this room loved people who utilized Free at Last. It was the single largest provider of health care and employment for Black and brown people in East Palo Alto. And that was built by a man who had some hard convictions behind him. And I wonder what barriers you may have faced, what you may still face in the role, whether it's about raising money, whether it's about having the credibility in the room. We often tend to lift up people with certain letters behind their names, not numbers that once came as their names. And just some of those barriers that you faced and the kind of courage of what you had to summon, you know, day one out of prison and going forward.
That's a hell of a question. Probably one of the barriers is that people often think that the only thing that I am is a formerly incarcerated person. They don't necessarily see me as a great-grandfather. If I start crying, because I can get into those spaces where what I'm pushing out is the full restoration of civil and human rights for formerly incarcerated people. But I'm so much more than just being formerly incarcerated. You know, the parts that is the most difficult and challenging for me to overcome is probably the stigma, because I'm a self-taught person and I was educated by the Black Liberation Army and the Black Panther Party. And every other thing that I had been credentialed at was probably co-signed by some white folks that everybody else paid homage to, but they didn't teach me how to read. It was these other people that taught me how to read. Before I stepped out the gate, there was a group of people that asked me a question that I learned the answer to the question probably hours after they asked it. They asked me what was I going to do with my newfound freedom. And another way of asking that was, what was I going to do with my privilege? Because many of the people who were gathered around me was also lifers too. And some of them served another 30 years longer. And my release date was October the 22nd, 1981. I walked less than 100 yards and got a job at the law office because of what Kenny said. I couldn't forget and I couldn't forgive. I couldn't forget and I couldn't forgive. And so, like, I have not had any other job than fighting for the full restoration of civil and human rights.
Come on now.
Since the day of the war. You know, I made promises to other human beings that I wouldn't forget. You know, so I don't know what it means to come home and not remember the person who died from asthma, a common illness inside of a correctional setting. When I did the 11 years, I had already taken 3 people to the hospital who died from stab wounds. You know, so when I talk about the stigma, it's that you can't lock up 2.3 million people without locking up brilliance and genius. So when I come to the community, they didn't see my brilliance and, you know, something had changed. And what could have possibly had changed, it was me. They seen the 19-year-old person who was arrested. And I was being judged as the 19-year-old person who had been arrested. They didn't see that half the stuff people read in criminal justice classes, I read for fucking fun. You know, they didn't see that. You know, they didn't see when we was named the murder capital. It was a reason that we built Free at Last. We was named the murder capital of the United States, and what we figured like what we needed to do is have a different strategy to stop people from killing each other. That wasn't the police that stopped that. That was formerly incarcerated people led by the Indian Jump Squad. It wasn't the police who stopped that shit. It wasn't the police that went and knocked on the doors and went and visited people in the prison and said, listen, homeboy, you rolling pretty hard up in the neighborhood and they got your mama over the police hood right now. You know, and we start having, how about outreach? How about outreach into a prison to people who were slinging dope on the streets?
Yes.
Yeah, we do. How about a harm reduction strategy that means that you don't shoot in people's houses? You shoot the person on the street corner. That kind of stuff. So the stigma, you know, not only was, you know, we created Free at Last, you know, and at one point I thought it was the largest thing that I would do. So anytime that you say critical resistance, that's not the largest thing that happened out of that experience. The largest thing that happened out of that experience, we taught how all the rest of you. So like you want to know some shit about branding from a person that ain't got a degree. Come on. Next time you say prison industrial complex, there's an obscure term in the Mike Davis book. There was some goddamn ashy foot people that was out of prison. So like when y'all be up there, you know, every once in a while, y'all probably can't speak to me in more than an hour that I won't hear me in your conversation.
Oh.
Tell it.
You know, so like in the first 3 chapters, the first person I called when Asha, when Michelle wrote her book, I was in Las Vegas, trying to get to the gambling shack and see the shows, and get some of that cheap free food. That ain't so free when you go to Vegas. The first person I called was Ethan, and I thought that it was the greatest piece of work that I ever read. And that was including, after reading for Nunn, that was after reading Ralph Ellison. that was after reading about Malcolm that was the greatest piece of work.
Was that his book, Cops Across Borders?
No. The one that I read, because the first thing that they taught me how to read was the autobiography of Malcolm X, and the next thing that I read was Soul on Ice. And the first time that people ever respected me in the prison is that when I stood up and said I disagreed with the concept that Eldridge Cleaver was advancing.
Are folks aware?
So,
Yeah.
they're probably not. But you know.
No, so just for reference, Eldridge Cleaver, who would become a Republican, advanced the argument that he was, the only reason he was raping black women was that it was practice for the coming war where he would rape white women. So there's a little disrupt in the communications secretary of the Black Panther Party there. And of course he did leave, as a reactionary and become, some kind of Ben Carson guy.
Talk about that stigma. It's like these challenges that I face right now. It's the challenges that, I just tried to buy a building for $1.8 million. How many would you stand up? Because I love you so much. Stand up, stand up.
I'm dear!
Yeah!
My journey ain't as long as hers. Because like when we first started, all of us in Nunn, and we were sending out people to various states, some of us didn't have permission to move. So when we was showing up and we was asking you to organize with us, some of us was on parole and we was violating that shit already.
Right.
I had to get a pass to get here this time. Just like the slave.
Just like the slave.
Come on, Susan Burton.
Come on, Susan, I think. We had that, so we couldn't even move. So like at a certain point, when we trying to buy that building, and we had the resources and figured out a financial scheme. We don't know what to do when you come up with the money and they want to sell you the building because you're black.
Come on now.
Right? Because we came up with another theory. That if we want to stop gentrification, we need to start buying our shit. I didn't know what to do. I don't want to get, because I can get up here and start crying and stuff like that. Kenny probably didn't even make it through this damn panel.
We got some miles to go.
We gonna try.
Let's try to get through here without crying, Kenny.
I want to bring both Gretchen and Michelle into this conversation because. No, I mean, like me, you shared the heartache and the burden of having family members, very beloved ones, locked up. And sometimes it's interesting, people still come up to me and say, what the prisoner's wife meant to them, when they were behind bars, or meant to their family members. But if I told you the truth, is that when I went to write that book, I tried to write it as a novel. I was ashamed. I was embarrassed. I was a girl who was from an upper middle class black family, post-civil rights baby, where our families believed that education, was everything. And I graduated high school at 15. The assumption was that I would have a doctorate sometime around 23, and that I would be married and own a house, I guess, by 28. By 28, I was married twice, didn't own a house, and had 1 degree. But I don't even know if I had it by 28. But, it was interesting, when I published The Prisoner's Wife, my father still wouldn't say it. What he would say, because it was published by Scribner, was that, my daughter's published by the House of Hemingway, because Hemingway was published by Scribner too, but he wouldn't say anything else. And I'm very supportive of good parents, but that is just to tell you about what some of that stigma is. And I wanted to put that frame around that a little bit, Gretchen, because both of your babies were I can't imagine seeing my child and I don't know that there's anything harder except losing a child, right? And what that meant coming from a community that maybe didn't think about incarceration very much, what that made us feel as parents, as family members, as loved ones. I got death threats for writing The Prisoner's Wife, and every job that I've had, I've gotten a phone call that said, don't hire the woman who married a killer, including places where I just wrote blogs for. So I wonder if you would talk a little bit about that, Gretchen, and then you, Michelle, pick up from there, please.
So I'm feeling like a bit of an imposter here because I haven't served time behind bars. I've certainly done my weekly trips as a parent to prison to visit my son. You know, they say that addiction is a family disease, and it certainly is. You can see how we all play our roles. But as a mother, yes, I did serve time. This is my precious boy that I shared my body for 9 months. Actually, he hung around. This is the boy that I breastfed for 2 years and did breast-ins in San Francisco because they weren't allowing us to breastfeed in public. I've always fought against injustice, and when it happens in my own family and my own neighborhood and people aren't talking about it because of stigma and shame. When my son was arrested at 20, and society and the criminal justice system and just about everybody else had labeled him a criminal, and I knew this boy's soul. And I started fighting against it. So I have to, in a way, thank these horrible laws that we have, because it brought me into a movement where I have a voice because of personal experience to try to change these absolutely horrible wrongs that are being done to all of us. I want to talk about the stigma a little bit, because when you think about it, when I first started, it was all about treatment instead of incarceration, and that passed, and some of the people that I was working with said, okay, our job's done. But I had just begun to scratch the surface of what was wrong with the way we were dealing with drug use, with people who became addicted, like my son became addicted. I realized that there was just so much more that we needed to do, so many more harm reduction strategies, which there's a whole slew of them. We discover every day that there's more need for various forms of harm reduction, right? This movement propelled me into motion because of my passion. I mean, I'm a mama bear. When somebody's doing something wrong to my child, like, I've come full focus. But it also, you know, with the new administration and all these things that we fought for so long, I mean, it can be terribly disheartening. You have to almost take a moment to grieve, and then that same system of injustice propels you forward to fight, to defend. The drug war has taken away some of my basic human mother's rights to nurture and protect. And I think that pushes me forward. Stigma lies in the criminal justice system, into society, even doctors and well-meaning healthcare providers who told me to use tough love, told me I was a codependent and an enabler. Labels, words matter, and we really have to change. Even today, I can say things that I find myself saying, wait a minute, that was stigmatizing. You know, we have to really check ourselves. Nonprofits who are going back because of the new administration to DARE programs and drug-free communities and all this kind of, I mean, it's creeping up all around me again. I feel like I've gone back 20 years to when we first started. So, I mean, we really have to be vigilant. How many moms are in the room that have a child that has been incarcerated? Julie, and I'm looking right at you. So you know what it feels like to see your son. My son was 20 when I saw him shackled and brought into court. I nearly fainted, you know, and I'll never forget that. I'll never forget that memory. That's deeply attached inside. It's a wrong to my family. It's a wrong to all families. Stigma even happens in our own families. I remember that when my son was incarcerated, my mother told me that I should walk away, that perhaps he was the bad seed. My mother, when she died, her very favorite person in the whole world was my son, by the way. He found his way back and became her favorite person because she learned about addiction. She learned about the war on drugs and that it was really a war on people. And so I think one of my important roles is to reach people out where they are, and try to reach viscerally to what will make a difference, whether it be, my background is as a dancer and theater, and I know that people learn and hear things and register things in various ways, like dance, how we started with the drummers and the dance today. Those things can change minds in ways that just blah, blah, blah talking is not going to do. And so I think that's my role, is to deep into what were the skills that brought me here. I didn't intend to be in this movement. I thank my sons for bringing me to this movement. But you know, I was just going to be a dancer. That was it. So, anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Gretchen. I also, as I turn to you, Michelle Crentsil, want to welcome the one and only Susan Burton to the table. We're sure trying to get off that opening plenary if Susan was going to be able to make it, but we're so glad you're here. We're going to bring you right into this conversation, Susan. Thank you so much for being here. And Michelle, you know, I mean, it was one of the first things that we talked about when you and I first met in Oakland, almost just about a year ago. And we talked about, you know, as a young woman, you know, Michelle is still in her 20s like me, you know, so we as young women, you see how rude these damn people are? Damn! You know, black don't crack. But you know what it's meant to see, generations. This piece is a generational piece. And what that meant for you, because coming from a family where there were those challenges, and then going to Harvard, and now coming into open philanthropy, tattoo tip to tip, right? You ought to know. You ought to know. Tell her to take off that sweater. But you know, and you know what that is like when you're sitting in rooms in Silicon Valley with people who are talking about they want to reform the criminal justice system and may think they're more expert than you.
Yeah, that's a great introduction. Yeah, I mean, I think, honestly, that's why I took the job. When I was leaving the union, so I used to work for a union as an organizer, doing work organizing there, and you know, I got offered this job at Open Philanthropy to work on criminal justice reform, and I called one of my friends. I was like, I can't leave the union, go work for philanthropy. What is that? And you know, he was sort of like, you know, we need you to take this job. Like, we need our inside man. Like, you have to be on the side of all those resources. You know, having some experience to be on that side of the table. These people have so much money and power dictating what happens, you know, in a field that affects so many people's lives. You know, he told me, like, I need you to do this. And so that's why I took the job. But, so a little bit about my background, and I feel like I'm on a panel of just like heroes right now, my personal heroes, so I'm even like nervous to speak among you, so like thank you for letting me be here. I think it's an honor for me. But I think like just the depth and the reach of this system is incredible. And I started even to realize that partly when I went to college, when I was at Harvard, we were in a class, and the class was actually a majority Black student class. It was a Black Studies class, and one of the professors was talking about just how far-reaching the criminal justice system is into the Black community. And he asked, how many of you have had a family member incarcerated, if not yourself, and people sort of just like looked at each other. You could see there was kind of like this hesitance, and then at least all of us started to raise our hand. Everybody. Every Black student in the class raised their hand. And we just looked at each other and was like, oh, this is like shit, this is what I'm talking about. Like here we are at Harvard, taught to think that we were exceptional, but we got here, we're totally different. And then he just like immediately brought us all down to the same level, where we're just like, all of us knew this experience. Every single one of us, whether it was parents, siblings, cousins, uncles, aunts, anybody, everyone had a story. Every single one of us. Like even when you asked the room before this panel, like the question I would ask, like especially for the Black people, how many of you don't have money? How many of you don't? Raise your hand. That's what I'd like to see, right? Like, because I think that. Oh, I can stand up. Sorry. Thank you. Stand up, so I'm very tall. But yeah, how many Black people in this room have not had a family member incarcerated, if not themselves? Okay. Like I think that's telling, right? And just hearing about sort of the stigma when people, you don't want to talk about it sometimes. I was taught not to talk about it. I was taught to just like lie about it, say something else. I remember talking to like my cousin's kid. We always said that like his father was in a military camp. He was not in a military camp. No, he was not. I had another cousin where he had struggled with an addiction and was in military prison, civilian prison, eventually died from complications of AIDS. And leaving school to go to the funeral, people were like, what happened? And they just like, you don't want to talk about it. Say something tragic, whatever. You just don't want to get into the details because you're worried that people will all of a sudden see you in a different way. And so you just come up with all sorts of weird lies about it. Which is it's really sad that people have to kind of create these different stories. But I think what's mostly inspiring to me now and seeing the type of organizing that's happening of people who have been directly impacted. Just hearing sort of Pastor Glasgow tell that story, I think what that shows is that you all have seen like the full extent that like our society will go to dehumanize people. Like there are no bounds. They will do everything to just like really dehumanize someone. I think a lot of people like, it abstractly, but like maybe you haven't, really experienced it, but you have experienced it and you've seen it, and so it creates this incredible drive for survival that I think is fueling the strongest, most innovative organizing we will ever see. And I think it's the only way that we'll win and beat a system like that is if we have the leadership of people who have that within them. Because they have the most at stake. It's like, I feel like that came up a lot of like, there's no option. It's not, there's no option. So it's like, there's the most at stake there. And I think so now in my job, I think my objective, my goal is to make sure that the resources that are out there, for criminal justice reform, like it's going to the people who are going to actually get us to the finish line. And those are the people right here, right? I think that's like the most important thing that I've learned coming into this movement and seeing the amount of work that they've done is that, there's no option, you have no at stake, and so you have no choice but to like push us till we win. So,
Thank you, Michelle.
Give me level check here. And so I want to exclude for the moment members of the Ordinary People's Society, A New Way of Life, and of All of Us Are None. How many people here either are part of or run a nonprofit organization, just by show of hands? Okay.
Wow.
Within those organizations, how many of you also have somebody in top tier decision-making positions who have been incarcerated? All right, all right. Give yourselves a round of applause. Because that's a rare showing. Typically, we don't see that at the top level in organizations, and many of the criminal justice reform organizations, Susan, unless we've started them ourselves. And part of that is that nonprofit structures tend to follow for-profit structures. Right? Sort of the Steve Jobsing of social profit industry, right? And so, you know, logic models follow that, how you measure metrics follow that, you know, and, you know, we think about that a lot in our work. Well, how many people did you get out of prison last year? How many this, how many that, right? It's a numbers game, you know, and I'm always reminded, we talked about this with Deborah Small once, of Bob Moses, who went down to Mississippi to register people to vote in 1964. He walked out. You know how many people he registered? Anybody know? 1. And would we have said that they shouldn't continue to push for voting rights in Mississippi in 1964? Or would we say keep bringing the buses down until we do what we need to do in this deadly state in Mississippi, goddamn? And yet we have these, you know, these metrics, and it's partially because we don't set up management systems that are reflective necessarily of the skill set that people bring. And so I want to talk a little bit about, beginning with you, Susan, what skills you brought to the table to turn your home into multiple homes that takes care of hundreds of women and has now just branched out into New York. What skills did you possess that somebody else didn't hire or give you those initial grants when you began doing the work you were doing?
So, Asha, before I get into anything, I need to acknowledge you. I need to thank you, because had it not been for you, we probably wouldn't even be here. I don't know the battles that you fought, but I know that you fought. That's what I did too, I fought. But I want you to know I see you, and I hear you, and most of all, I feel you. And I just need to say thank you. And I know that it's not in vain. We don't know what's going to bubble up, how big we going to go, but we going to go big. We going to go big. Yeah. So, I think what I brought was what I want to call non-traditional intellect.
Yes.
You understand? It was from out of my experience, out of caring, and from that grew a hell of a commitment to free my sisters up out of that prison industrial complex. You know, I didn't get to go to Yale or Harvard. I went to jail.
Right.
And I'm glad you did go to Harvard. I'm glad. Because you coming back to us. But I went to jail and I came back. And you know, I got a crack. I got a crack at a few months out in Santa Monica by the beach. And what I experienced there revolutionized my thoughts about what could happen in lieu of incarceration. Because that's what was happening for them out there. You know, they didn't go, I remember in a meeting, I'm in a meeting, you know, I just turned 20 years, y'all, and I took my 20-year chip November 4th in Norway.
Come on.
Where I went to visit and examine their prison system. You know, so
It's all right.
I was in the meeting and the guy says, he said, "Damn, I hate green." Like, I was high and I was driving and I ran over some people and they gave me community service and I had to paint the jail green. I'm like, I had to live in that motherfucker.
Right.
What the fuck? Over and over and over and over again. You see a policeman kill my son. He was 5. And drugs came into the community, and that's what I medicated because we didn't have grief counseling and therapy and places that I could go and get help for the devastating loss of a son by a policeman who never even got out of the car, and a policeman department that never ever said they were sorry. So all I had was crack, and I took it. And I need to take some of the money went down here and blew the police station up. They killed my son. You know, and I needed something. You know, so what was available was crack. And I went to prison. But when I got out there in Santa Monica, you know, I got like 9 months of weekly therapy. And treatment and clothes and food and training. I'm like, what the hell? And I got the guy who painted the jail green. I'm like, what? So what I did is I had an experience, and you know, I knew how to get down. And that get down, I brought back to the community, saved my money, bought a house, and began to meet my friends at the bus station. And when I would meet them, I would offer them to come to my house to live. And we created community. And out of that grew so much more. You know, and you know, and this is one of the things. So this was 20 years ago. They were throwing rocks at our house. You know, nobody understood that women coming home from prison needed a safe place to be because they were vulnerable. $100,000 a year to lock me up and toss me back into the community, mangled and tortured from the experience that I've had prior to and while incarcerated. And you know, I've talked to, you know, I tried to get support outside of, you know, my own little meager money, because I worked a minimum wage job and saved that money to get that house.
You heard that? Say that again.
Yeah, I worked a minimum wage job for a year and saved all my money and got a house. And then went to fetch my people out of the prison back to the house, fetched. And funding organizations said they don't do service.
That's right.
That it was a bottomless hole.
That's right.
That they don't invest in saving people's lives. They don't give a shit about where people sleep or if they sleep.
Come on.
You know, and I didn't get it. But I kept on going. And I continued, and now, you know, my dream, I've just published this book called Becoming Miss Burton. And it ain't a dream. It's a goal I'm working toward. I got concrete plans now. I know how to plan. I got a strategic plan. And as I go on tour, we're going to create safe houses across this nation.
That's right. That's right.
woman by woman. And the first one is opening up October 28th in New York City. Damn, the real estate's high in New York. You know, but we're doing it. You know, we're doing it. So what I bought, I know how to get down. And I have non-traditional intellect. And I'm gonna work it. I'm gonna honor it if the others don't.
All of us?
All right.
So let me do a speed round and then I want to open it up to all of you. Speed round.
Okay.
All right. Tell me up here, you talking to Dorsey. Michelle Wright is on one grant. So I love that you named that conflict between, you know, not doing service.
I got one other question. Because I've seen so many hands go up around nonprofit leaders and engagement in this room. I need to ask, and I don't need an answer. How many people are forced to compromise some part of the people's you're serving well-being based on those county, state, government contracts that they push out at you? How many of you lay on when your head hit the pillow at night, you know, feel like you're squirming because they having you deliver something that ain't beneficial to your people? You don't have to answer.
I just think that, but I do want to use that as a segue because I think, you know, in our own grants program, there's a point like we don't do service. Although Kenny can tell you that in feeding 300 people a day in Dothan, Alabama, and Tallahassee, and here in Atlanta, there's also an amount of political education that also happens during that time. Black Panthers do that, right? Bring them, look, church mothers knew that. Church mothers knew that, right? So I want to take that and just go right down the list. We'll start at the other end this time, Michelle. So, you know, what is one concrete thing, right, that we could do better that would ensure the fullest participation of people who have been incarcerated or otherwise impacted by the criminal justice system, family members and such? What is one thing that all of us can think about doing better in our organizations? Or would you recommend to philanthropists?
To philanthropists and funders, I think the most important thing is funding that, like realistic funding, which I mean, you know, tiny grants that are like tied to some specific project that they don't even want to do is ridiculous. You know, give actual money that can be used, you know, multi-year grants even, and don't restrict it, you know. If there's leadership there, then they know what to do with them.
Right.
That's right. Don't tell them what to do with the money. And I think also, you know, where different foundations can do more than C3, like when they can do C4, you know, like political money, do that too. I think the C3 structure was kind of set up to like get a lot of communities not politically engaged, and I think that's a hindrance to building their political.
Yeah, and you know, and I'm asking this question very aware that all of this money, I mean, it's, you know, we get the littlest amount of nonprofit money. Most of it goes to hospitals and whatever. We out here fighting for whatever 10% remains that didn't go to the ballet or whatever. But even still, you're talking about millions and really billions of dollars as this field has grown, right? And we still are struggling with some of the very same things that brought us into this work, which always makes you wonder, like, do we really want to change things? Right? And so I just wonder, what would be that concrete piece of advice you would give either large-scale organizations, whether it's DPA or the ACLU, or philanthropists, that they could do better to really move the needle on the dial?
Okay, so what Susan was talking about funding, and again, funding is always a problem, and I find that the more we stick our necks out with drug policy reform, the smaller the pool of funders is. But we will never take, because we're an advocacy organization, we don't go after government grants, we don't go after state grants, because I never want to be muzzled. I'm getting way too old for this shit. But that said, funding's a problem. I mean, there's some very real costs to the work that we do. The only direct service that we do with the New Path really is our naloxone distribution. I'll call out April Ella here, who handles that in San Diego County. But again, because it's advocacy that we do, and there's a small pool. So what could we do better? I think we can always listen to people better. Listen to your own heart better. Listen to when you are stigmatizing other people, because we all do on some level. And that gets me back to what my main thing, and you hear me say this again and again, we have to work together. This is why we started Moms Unite to end the war on drugs. It wasn't to start yet another organization. It was to kind of create an umbrella that brings in people who are doing this work already all over the country and all over the world to make our voices louder, bigger mass of people from all walks of life. And I think we oftentimes get into our little silos, or oftentimes we say, my pain is greater than your pain, and therefore you don't belong. I think we need to work together and honor other people's journeys and other people's experience and other people's talents, because this isn't going to happen if we don't all learn to work together.
Thank you, Gretchen. Thank you so much. And so I know that you sort of pulled apart. We've talked about unrestricted funding, multi-year grants, maybe shaking up what the metrics look like. Dorsey, would you talk about, something you've done masterfully, which is extraordinary leadership development. And here I want this to go out to groups that don't do that, right? What are the kinds of things that make an organization culturally competent when it comes to having people who have been incarcerated in their roles, right? So that they're not forever flying low in the organization. We kind of drag them out when we want to say, well, somebody incarcerated on our state, you know what I mean? So how do we become more, because you've done this masterfully with young people coming right out the joint who would rise up in your organization to top tier leadership.
Check this out. I recognize that I'm in the winter of my life, and that the movement to get to the mountaintop will take longer than I can arrive there. So if we don't train younger organizers, we may not never see the mountaintop.
Yeah. Amen.
Right? So I already know I'm not going to make it to the mountaintop. I may make it to a plateau at a certain point. So it's not like I do this stuff. It's like I came in the Drug Policy Alliance and I haven't used it 26 years and I haven't hit smoked a joint in that long. And I need to really tell y'all, I really love weed. No shit about that. I had a license and they said, you can go home, just don't get caught with no more weed and cash. I was on the lower yard in San Quentin. Going home. Within 8 hours. I couldn't even hold a question for more than 8 hours. So I think it's imperative that we train younger organizers. And I think I'd be remiss to say that East Palo Alto exists in the context of Silicon Valley. And I could be your modern day sharecropper. And it may not be picking cotton. It could be the technology. I don't get a goddamn dime out of Silicon Valley. And I stay in probably the most wealthiest 5-mile area in the world.
Mark Zuckerberg to give that man some money.
You know?
I'm gonna call him right now, because he was like that.
I can call Mark, I can call Google, I stay less than a mile from Facebook.
Right.
80 yards.
Right?
Right.
The same chicken shit school that I went to for elementary school still exists, and I walk right past it. I done already lost my neighbors.
Right.
I done already been gentrified.
Come on,
My house is worth $1 million.
say that.
I didn't want the fucking $1 million. I wanted my neighbors that I went to grade school.
Come on now.
So Dorsey, what are you doing with all of us in that?
What I do with all of us in Nunn? I'm sorry, I just had to say it.
That's why I'm here. I'm bring you back. I'm bring you
I'm
back.
triggered when y'all be talking about Silicon Valley because there's sometimes when y'all texting and y'all Facebooking, y'all don't recognize that there's another group of people that could be injured, and y'all don't even see us. We've only had one black elected official in San Mateo County in the history of the county. So you don't got to go down south to be down south.
That's right.
But anyway, what I do as all of us are Nunn is that I recruit and organize. You know, because I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you that every formerly incarcerated person in this room probably should be attending the meeting right after that during lunchtime so we can hatch a plan. Because if you don't come up with a plan, you plan to fail. So how do we build unity among ourselves? Because at a certain point, the first poem that I ever publicly read was to my mother. And that poem was stop telling people I was on vacation.
I want to get to, and let me bring Kenny. I want to bring Kenny because this is serious, and I think that, you know, Kenny, you and I have had these discussions over the years. What it means to not have the nomenclature, right? As every industry, which is what nonprofits now are, is, right? I mean, you know, there's all kinds of buzzwords. You know, when they first started using metrics, I was running around trying to figure out what the hell a metric was. I had no idea. Right? It took me a while. It didn't mean I wasn't effective. I just didn't know the nomenclature. Then it was intersectional. That was a buzzword. Now it's proximate. I'm learning faster now. Proximate. I'm learning faster. But I mean, what does it mean? You know, and what do we have to do, those of us who sit in some of these large organizations, away from perhaps the core of the problem and yet pretend to speak for it? How do we become more culturally competent so that we're not here in 2 years from now having some of the same discussions? How do we make it better and more competent for you and for you, Susan?
So 2005, you know, if we would ask that question about how many nonprofits got formerly incarcerated people in the upper echelon, it probably would have been us too. 2007.
But you started those organizations, right?
2007 would have been the same thing. Until, and I gotta give homage to you just like Susan did, until asha started paying attention to it. So you ask me what do? We start paying attention like you did. Because in 2009, we started getting on panels, we started being the panels, we started being on the plenaries, and we started expressing our own voices right here in Drug Policy Alliance. And that was the work of asha, bandele, and all the fights that Susan was talking about, and Ethan accepting it, and stand up. Steve, I'm talking to you. And Stephen accepting it, and everybody else accepting, okay, look, we say we're here to change Drug Policy Alliance for those directly impacted, but we ain't even allowed them to say shit. So if you really want to know what to do, start recognizing what you have in the room. I can't do your logic models. I'm going to call asha. I'm going to call Michelle and get on her nerve. I'm going to get you down there and sit up there and explain to you what I'm doing, and I can put it on paper for you and show you, but if you call me on the phone, I might not get articulated to be prolific as you want it to be with your damn buzzwords. Like I'm filling out an application and it's going to dismiss my application because I don't know the key words for the computer. And that's why a lot of our young people not getting jobs now. But if you really ask my mother back then, Mama Tina stand up, they got hair now. See her hair?
Mama Tina!
Happy birthday! because of breast cancer eating her up because she was dying because her only child is locked up in prison, and my rich ass brother and all them would not even help her get $200 to buy me out. Don't talk about that. It's only gonna start today, not today. But so what you want to do is recognize who's there. One of the biggest problems that I find with educated people is you underestimate every damn body else.
Right.
And Susan, and then bringing the same question to you, because we've certainly seen a larger role that men who have been incarcerated have played in a number of our organizations. But I don't know that we've been able to imagine quite the same for black women.
Okay.
I don't know if we can imagine black women in leadership.
So,
I don't mean us in this room.
Yeah.
But I think in general, try to think about large-scale organizations that are run by black women. Think about the Supreme Court. Think about the federal judiciary. Think about how many black women doctors you know. I've never had a black woman doctor. So I just, for black, how do we make that question confident for sisters too?
Asha, so I come, and most formerly incarcerated women come from a history of horrendous abuse. And, for so long, I kept throwing myself on the track saying, please save me. And then there came this realization, ain't nobody gonna save me. And when I think about resources and whatnot, are they really coming to save us? What do we do to create a stronger self and a stronger community? Like Vanya, we hung out for a little while, and the next thing I know, she had starting over. And she's doing her nonprofit work.
In one of the hardest places in the United States. Trump-ass country in Southern California.
So, I mean, I gotta be free. And I have to work free. And I have to be clear that I'm free. Through some of the work I do with the women, I still feel a bit enslaved, like them damn traveling passes. When I gotta go and play with a parole agent.
Come on.
To get a traveling pass that says keep this on your body at all times. Ain't that what my ancestors did when they went from one county to the next?
Yes.
Right. But I think that we have to, let me put it in an I gotta understand that freedom is going to have to come through me and my work. And it has to stay clear and authentic. And I can't look for anyone else to make that happen but me. And my, and the determination and building that community. If any of y'all know the book and got the book, it starts with Ingrid, the one back there that say Black Women Matter on her shirt right there. And, I see, freedom and power through that work and what have you, but I really have to understand that freedom, maybe some resources for me to do some stuff might come that helps me be, move my mission, create safe houses or whatever it is. But our freedom ain't coming in.
You know, it's hard. I think that what you're saying is that we have to teach people how to treat us, which is often very hard.
Exactly.
It's hard. We have to teach people how to treat us, which sometimes, because it's hard for us, right? Because then you get labeled as mean, a bitch, difficult.
And then you give up some of your power.
Yeah.
You know, you can lose some of that in that transaction. So I don't know. I'm just an old woman.
No. But when I was 5, you were 6. So and you were 68. So all right, you still look good. So we have 15 minutes remaining, and I want to get as many people in. So as much as we can capsule and get the questions out, so we can get answers. Everybody knows I am a mean moderator. I don't let the mic out of my hand because bad things can ensue. So don't let the mic out.
First of all, again, like everyone else has said, okay, so I'm a former prisoner, 216049, mentally.
And you got a traveling pass, right?
I got a traveling pass. I was coming in. Well, I was coming in anyway. But I went on and tried to, go, yeah. But I want to say that in desperation and throwing myself on the tracks and woe is me because nobody would help. The only organization, or the first, was DPA.
Okay.
Big Papa.
Yeah.
Come and help us in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Because we was trying to get a 70-year-old man doing life without on a weed case out. He said, call this number and ask for asha.
Yeah.
We played phone tag. I called her. She said, listen, don't worry about missing the calls. We here now. What can we do?
We see
And that was in 2012.
Yeah.
So I'm saying we need more organizations, you guys, to be reaching out to other people that have money and school them on what you know. Maybe that's helpful. But as far as just speaking to the black women and our experience, we need to come together to heal us.
We are together.
But we need to keep coming together.
Yeah, we are.
Coming together to heal us internally so we can believe. Because some mornings I get up to do this work, my body gets up and my spirit is still laying down. We need that encouragement from each other.
Yep. So, man, if we can take a little space so I can walk through. Thank you so much. I appreciate
what you said while you walking over there, Asha.
What happened?
I said in response to what she said while you're walking over there, I just want to say to women, I don't know how the men hang out and how they do it, but it's just so important to have community, to build community, to keep you inspired and so forth. It's just really important to have community.
And share strategies. Learn how to believe in yourself.
That all comes in community.
So I have a question, but I also want to make a statement. One, I'm from Oakland, Berkeley, and powerful place to be. But God sent me 6 years ago to New York State, and so I work currently in a state that only just recently passed a law, legislation to not incarcerate young people in adult prisons. My work right now is working with those young people as they come out and released. And a question that I have is, we're charged with, my staff and I created a program that is to work with the young people once they're released and help them get back into school, if that's what they choose to do.
Name of program.
Transition Coach Program. Syracuse, New York. I got cards.
Okay.
I do program development.
I'm gonna just encourage questions so I get
the question is, how can we best support these young people, because we're talking young people 16, 17 that are in prison with adults and come out in a space 2-3 years later, and we don't really know, we can only do so much, but I want to know how to, just from what you explained of the experience being incarcerated, how can I help my staff to help these young people?
Let me say this real quick. So 2 things. When
Some
I
strategies,
first got
some
out,
specific
I got
strategies.
you.
Thank you.
When I first got out of prison, the first encounter I had after doing 14 years was my little brother-in-law picking up my stepmom. My mom couldn't even get me, she had to work. And I went to the restroom. And in the restroom, I'm sat there for about an hour, not using the bathroom, trying to figure out how to flush the toilet. And my little brother, 14 years old, came inside. listen to me, you talking about strategy. And he said, Kenny, come on. And I said, Anthony, come here. And I'm crying. And he said, why are you crying? I said, how the hell you flush the toilet? And he said, just come on. And when we walked off, the toilet flushed. I ran out the restroom and ran to the car. And I'm like, Anthony, come on. Them folks following us. See, they just flushed the toilet. They still watching. And my little brother had enough sense out of everybody in the damn house to take me and teach me how to cross the street. How to look at the cable, the remote control with all them red, white, and blue buttons. Because I was used to 5 buttons, on, off, volume up, down, channel up, down.
Right.
Start the teaching and all that before they get out.
Right.
Don't wait till we get out.
And I got to say yes to something and stop saying no to everything. Because I don't think that you can teach people that they get out at 23 years old, 22 years old, if you're not offering, if you tell them to put down the sack, tell them to pick up something. Yes. Because I don't think you can tell a person to stand still and be hungry. So if you're not actually saying, I'm going to actually employ you in my organization, if I'm not going to make a way for you, then stop doing that, because I think it makes it hard for other people doing organizing, because at a certain point, you got to be willing to share the resources.
Right. Yes. Thank you. I'm going to just encourage people as much as possible to do questions, because I've seen a lot of hands go up. I want to get them on here.
My name is Teresa. Thank everybody for coming. I'm from Atlanta. I'm with Women on the Rise, Maryland and Win. And we just decriminalized marijuana down here.
That's right.
$75 fine, and going about your business. But coming here from North Carolina, I came as an employment counselor that I work with people. I went to this organization because I didn't know how to answer the question. So when they hired me about 3 months later, when people came to sit down at my desk, they were saying, Miss Teresa, we know you didn't smoke no crack. I said, yes, I did. But in the process of me being honest with them, they got honest with me. So we was a jobs program. They wanted to know, how do you get a job? So the drug dealer didn't know that he had customer service skills and he knew how to count money. He didn't know none of that. So when I put it down on paper, he said, is that me? And so when I came to Atlanta, moved here, I was back in that same position of having to explain who I was. That I was a 62 felon check cashier. You know, those kind of things made me not want to go look for a job no more. And the agencies weren't hiring. So I started my own business. And the reason how I started this cleaning business was, okay, here goes the question. When I started the cleaning business, how do you talk to somebody that's looking at a $10 job and say, take the skills that you learned while you were in prison and maybe turn that into a business? She made me clean, and after I stopped cleaning, I'm down here with the cleaning.
Listen, let me say this real quick. You were two of the best people in the world, Asha and Michelle right there, right? When I sat up there and said earlier, I don't know how to do logic models with this and that and the other, she know how to pull it out of me and made me do it on paper. And then I'm like, oh shit. And she said, yeah, I got that from you. I'm like, for real? So how you do that is you got to tell them you're an expert by experience. That's on all my cards. I don't care what your education is. I tell people quick, you are expert by your own experience.
Amen. Amen. That's my boy.
I give the experiences of my own journey when people don't want to, don't want to show up for a low-wage job or what have you. I give them examples through my own experience. Just a couple of days ago, the woman was saying that she can't walk around the corner from the bus stop to the job because it's too late. And I asked her how many nights did she walk the streets to crack.
Okay.
But I give a kind of like learned experience based on what I did and who I am.
So let me name that we have 3 minutes left. So I have 2 questions. Are you sure about it? So you had a 30-second comment? You good? Okay.
What's the question?
Okay, all right. So brother over here, let me come to you.
Hello, thank you. So my question, because this is something that is really like touches my heart when you talk about black women and like feminine women. I'm constantly learning, you know what I mean, unlearning all of these things. So this question is more geared towards the black men on the panel. I want to know, how do we put down a lot of the empowerment and power that we gain as black men and leaders in this position, where we can be compromised in a similar fashion, but we, going back to what I think it was what Gretchen said, somebody said, oh no, Michelle said it about them having the most at stake. Black women definitely got more at stake than us, right? So we might gonna have to lose something, but how do we do that in a strategic way where you don't sabotage your movement and everything you do?
I'm just learning that, brother.
I'm sorry. So let me just ask a 30-second answer on that, Kenny, 30-second answer,
Okay.
and then we'll have a bigger conversation.
30-second answer. I'm just learning that. In the last 2 years, what I have learned is to recognize what I told y'all.
Just say you don't know.
Can I finish? Can I at least finish? So in learning that process, what I do is push the women out front more and step myself back more. The 30-second answer, okay?
And we're gonna close out with Oklahoma. Because some people represent us in the very best way. Please welcome Connie Johnson. And we're gonna give you
My question to everyone in the room is, what do you view the role of voting, and how can you guarantee that you're involved in changing the policies that make a difference in this area? That is the end of the day question. What are you doing about voting for people who look like you, who've been through what you've been through, and who will listen to you to change these policies?
Okay, so 15 seconds each. 15 seconds.
Well, the first thing that we did, as all of us in Nunn, was that we helped you get elected. You was the first all of us in Nunn member that was elected.
Kenny?
And what we did was we changed policies in Alabama where you could vote out of prison, jail, and out.
How many more people started voting this year because of your work?
And because of our work, over 200,000 more people.
A voting initiative within our office, and we go into jails. We had to sue the sheriff to get in there. We sued the damn sheriff. We walk through projects. We understand that so many lives were lost for us to have the right to vote.
Gretchen?
I don't have much to add on this, except that there are a lot of people who can vote and don't vote because they don't think that their voice matters. So our work is also to go out to those people and declare, in this state of...
And how about mobilize a few 100,000 people to change laws in the state of California? We'll leave that too. Crentsil, you have the last word.
After the election's over, keep organizing to make sure that they make good on their promises.
Amen.
And educate voters on not only about voting, but the strategies like absentee voting, like voting by mail. That's a key one, especially among groups that are disenfranchised, who don't believe that they have a right to vote. They can vote by mail.
Thank you, Representative Johnson.